Alrund's Epiphany has been absolutely dominating Standard, and a lot of people are lobbying for it to be banned. Is this simply because the card is powerful and people don't like the card, or does it actually have some design flaws that kind of break the rules of Magic? Steven with Magic Meta Money, Alrund's Epiphany. Will it be banned? I don't know, I can't predict the future, you'll have to ask Ian Duke. Should it be banned? That's what we're going to dive into today, and the answer? I'm leaning towards yes. Time Walk effects are no stranger to the ban list, which is really interesting because Time Walks by themselves aren't necessarily the most powerful thing to be doing in Magic. If Time Walk is just an explore, meaning all you're doing is drawing a card and getting an extra land drop, that's fine. We've seen that in Standard. We've even seen that in Standard at instant speed with Growth Spiral, and it was powerful, yes, but it wasn't ban-worthy, it wasn't breaking the game, it wasn't just destroying the experience of playing Standard. The problem with Time Walk effects is not simply the explore ability to get an extra land drop and draw a card. It's all the other resources that go along with it. Extra mana, extra combat steps, extra Planewalker activations, anything like Howling Mine and other guard draw effects that let you draw extra cards per turn in addition to your draw step. Extra life. All of these additional resources during your extra turn is what makes extra turns really powerful, but that requires other game pieces and committing to the board with planeswalkers or creatures that can attack. But the problem with Alrund's Epiphany is that you don't have to have those other game pieces. You don't have to have a Howling Mine effect or a planeswalker. You just get extra resources wrapped up for free in your extra turn. Those seemingly innocuous 1/1 bird tokens are the reason why this card is insanely powerful and why this card is showing up everywhere in Standard and why you feel like you kind of can't beat it once it's cast. Those 1/1 flying bird tokens can turn into a lot of different resources. They can chump block to give you another 8 life and get you an extra couple draw steps. They can turn into straight up cards by trading with your opponent's 1 toughness creatures, and they can serve as a win condition all by themselves, which getting pecked to death by birds sounds like an absolute nightmare. But you know what's not a nightmare? You guessed it, joining the Wolf Pack by hitting subscribe. Now everything we've said about this card is not too powerful for a 7 or 6 mana sorcery. The problem is that this card isn't 7 or 6 mana. You simply have to live long enough to cast it at 6 or 7 mana, and then you get all of your mana back on the next turn, making this card free. And you know what free cards are for Magic? Horrible! Imagine a sorcery that dealt 4 damage to your opponent, gained you 8 life, let you have an extra land drop, and drew a card as a cantrip. What would you be willing to pay for that? Like 4 mana, 5 mana even? How about F-R-E-E, free? Once you realize that this card is absolutely free, it doesn't cost you any mana, and it doesn't cost you a card from your hand, you just straight up get a 0 mana, cycle, create 2 1/1 bird tokens. I mean, that's insane. Like, that's the floor of the card. And that's just really, really good to just get for free. Did I mention that this card is free? Okay, enough of that, we get it. But let's get to another big problem with this card. It's the lack of interaction. As a sorcery, you're already cutting out 3 colors from interacting with this card, which on the surface isn't necessarily a bad thing. The color pie having strengths and weaknesses is part of the beauty of Magic in that some colors interact well with other colors, but then have weaknesses to other colors. So if you want to deal with a sorcery, you either have to play blue yourself to try to counter it off the stack, or play discard in order to get this from your opponent's hand. Except that this card has Suspend, so actually when you're casting Duress or Humiliate, you're just whiffing on the card that you're trying to get. That is a problem. You're already down to just 2 colors interacting well with it, and now you're actually really down to 1 color, and that only blue can play against blue. And now, hey, if I'm playing blue counterspells in order to deal with my opponent's Alrund's Epiphany, you know what else I should do? Run Alrund's Epiphany in my own deck. After all, it's free. I even one time had my opponent counter my Alrund's Epiphany with Test of Talents, and then when they searched my library, graveyard, and hand, they only found 3 copies. And then I proceeded to win the game with the 4th copy that was already in exile face down by being foretold. My final conclusion is that this card simply does too much for too little investment and is too easy to cast every single game of every single match. And it's only going to get easier once you include a couple copies of Alchemist Gambit in your deck. After all is said and done, Wizards is going to do what Wizards is going to do, and they're either going to keep this card around or they're going to smash it with the ban hammer. But one thing that I really hope they consider, which perhaps is the biggest nail in the coffin against Alrund's Epiphany, is match concession rate. Not just simply how many times this card is cast and the game is over at that point, but how many opponents are willing to just scoop immediately upon seeing what deck you're playing. If they see Lava Glide Pathway in turn 1, they'll concede. And that to me is really strong evidence against this card being part of a fun standard environment. And it could just be a sampling bias, and I happen to see a lot of opponents concede on turns 1 or 2 against seeing which deck I'm playing. But Wizards has that data. They have all the data they need in order to make that type of decision to see, are opponents just conceding all the time because they just say, I don't want to play against this. I'd rather take a hit on my ranking, even though I'm trying to get to Mythic, I'm trying to work my way up the ranking ladder. They're willing to just take a hit on the ladder, which isn't the biggest stakes in the world, but it's some stakes when you're playing standard ranked on Arena. And then the fact that people just don't care about that and they'd rather not play, maybe this card isn't long for this world.